This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders that are designing our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and my guest today is BJ Coleman. BJ is a former NFL quarterback who now serves as CEO of a behavioral healthcare company in Chattanooga, Tennessee. After being drafted by the Green Bay Packers, he transitioned from professional football to leading high-performing teams and turning around struggling facilities. As the author of The Pivot, Coleman shares practical strategies for resilience, leadership, and navigating life's biggest transitions. BJ Coleman, welcome to the podcast. How are you, my friend?
Hey, Joe. Thank you so much for having me. Doing great. Glad to be here.
I'm glad you're doing well. And before we get into the book and everything that's going on in your life, I need to pick your brain because you are a former elite quarterback, played across, academia and professional level. So I want to pick your brain on something. So I am a lifelong, suffering New York Jets fan. And one of the things that has been plaguing my organization is quarterback play, like being able to find the right quarterback. And the Jets are not, I don't want to say dumb. They don't know what they're doing. And obviously some luck has to play with part, but they have drafted many a quarterback who were highly ranked and number one in their position or number two in their position. So it seemed like, all the Jets have to do is draft the number one or two quarterback, and then everything falls into place. We all know that's not the case. So BJ is someone who's risen through the ranks and knows what it takes to be an elite quarterback. And this, I know it's a singular question for me, but I think for most people find it fascinating. Like if they follow college football and they see like a kid just crushing it at the collegiate level and then don't make it in the pros. What is there one thing or multiple, maybe it's multiple things, but can you pinpoint why that one person, say generically, can't make that jump?
Yeah, I don't know if there's one thing to that, Joe, but it's a very common problem that you see across the sport year in and year out from the draft, where multiple quarterbacks go higher than other quarterbacks, only to see that sometimes the guy who's fallen to the fourth, fifth, sixth round ends up being a 10-year Pro Bowl potential Hall of Fame type quarterback. Some of that is because of the team and the surrounding cast that they go to. Drafted later might mean that you go to maybe a better team with a better supporting cast, and you're that piece that maybe that they were missing that gels well with the offensive coordinator, the scheme, the mindset. We talk about it a lot in the game. You have those quarterbacks that are system quarterbacks, those guys that you can plug into a system and they're going to be successful because they have the measurements and the credentials and they can go right in and be great. And then in the NFL, maybe they go to a team that doesn't have that system and they don't have that coach or they don't have those other surrounding cast resources and they're not as successful. So a lot of it's timing, it's place, it's understanding maybe who you are and being able to go through those trials and tribulations early in college so that you can take that example and then be able to go and be successful in that NFL type setting. Very difficult to do, Joe. It's hard to assess that talent, even when you're a scout in the league, to be able to tell if somebody's skill level is going to transfer from college to pro, or can you draft somebody from a smaller school? And is that going to work out and be successful, like a Joe Flacco out of Delaware and goes off and he wins a Super Bowl? So it really is circumstantial. And a lot of it, the one thing that I do know is true is that those guys that get put in adverse situations early on in their career and figure out how to overcome that, and they're often very, very successful at any level, in any field, if you wish, not just football, but end up being very successful beyond the game as well.
Well, thank you for indulging me. And speaking of making that switch to the field, your book and everything you're writing about now and talking about is the pivot and the pivot you make. And I know for many people, the word pivot was one of those words that outside of a Friends episode, no one really talked about it until the pandemic. So your pivot was having to go from being this elite professional athlete into the real world and find a quote unquote real job. When you're going through your athletic career, are you even thinking about a pivot, or are you so focused that, hey, all I care about is X's and O's, preparing for my body and my mind for the sport? Or was there something in the back of your mind that said, okay, I'm probably not going to be able to do this forever. I'm going to have to do something else. When did those thoughts kind of creep into BJ's head?
Yeah, great question. And it's a combination of both. It really is. It's a combination of both. You have to be focused in the moment. You got to make sure you're understanding your fundamentals, making sure that your diet is right, that your workout is right, that your sleep patterns are right, that your study and preparation habits are good and solid. And then you go out and you practice on the field, and then you realize, okay, I need to adjust that. We need to change from maybe focus on approaching a cover two defense this week to maybe it's more man single high safety. And then you realize, you've got to play chess, not checkers, where you're a couple of moves ahead. But you got to stay in the moment when you're in the game, because it's very quick to get passed by if you're looking too far ahead or you're not evolving. Either way, but I had a set of two very good parents that always prepared me. Hey, listen, one day the game will be over. Nobody really plays much past that mid-30 range, if you're lucky. If you're lucky to have that kind of longevity in a league like the NFL, which is so violent, and it takes such a toll on your body. I was always in the back of my mind, what am I going to do next? But you're never thinking it's going to end. You never think that it's going to be over, and that when it is over, I'm just going to stay with that track all the way through. I've got a PhD in becoming a coach, and that's what you'll always do. And for me, somewhere along the way, I started to I was always in love with the game because of the camaraderie and the people you get to meet and what it can do for you and the trajectory of your career and life. But I always had aspirations to do more, and ultimately for me, it came down to, who am I outside of this game? And that was a very difficult question for me to answer when you're in it, because a lot of the things happening to you are very much as a result, if not a direct result, of the game. So, when I was told, that Tuesday up in Canada in 2016, that you no longer are needed, and your time playing the children's game at 28 is over, you stop and pause and go, okay, I was thinking about this, I was prepared, I thought, but now it really is over. And what do I do next if I don't want to go right in to what that path is already, of becoming a offensive coordinator, quarterback coach, and then eventually maybe a head coach, or maybe I want to become an athletic director and get into athletic administration, or maybe I want to go into becoming a lawyer so that I can become an agent for one of these guys. There's so many different paths within the sport that it creates, but I still, I wasn't finding that sated feeling of where I was okay with going that route out of the gate. So I hit that next button, and it's only really at that time, Joe, to answer your question in a roundabout way, when it actually happens is when the rubber meets the road, and you have to be able to sit and really understand, what am I going to do next? So for me, it was that moment in Canada where I was like, it's really over. And on that plane ride back to the States, where it's like, when I land, you gather yourself and you figure out what you're going to do next. You start tapping in your network, and you start to go from there. So it's a pretty surreal feeling. You can have a playbook, but you got to make sure it's not too rigid, where it's not flexible enough for you to pivot and understand that there are going to be things that you didn't prepare for or couldn't prepare for, that you'll have to be able to overcome along the way.
That's great. All right, so let's get the spoilers out of the way. What did you tell us what? So once you landed, what was that? What was the path you decided to take?
Yeah, great question. So first thing I did was immediately sit down, start to write down the folks that I had in my network that I knew I could reach out to, that were good contacts, that either themselves could help kind of guide me, or connect me to the people that could guide me, whether that was folks that could give me a job, whether that was folks that could kind of talk me through what my skill set of being not just an athlete but a quarterback in the collegiate and professional level, what skills transfer, what does that mean? And as soon as I found that mentor, that person that was able to be real and could talk that real sense into, here's how you truly go back to the NFL of life, I realized it was not going to be an easy track, and that it would almost have to be going back to the beginning. Nobody cared that I could throw a football, Joe, 70
Right.
yards anymore. It just nobody. You become almost like the competition. You go from being the entertainment to becoming that competition, if you will. And you're no longer in a we type locker room. You're in a me type world, and you have to learn how to balance that. That's very difficult for us athletes or folks that have been on teams. I don't want to just limit that to athletics. It could be anybody that's been a part of a group bigger than self, where you're used to supporting everyone and making sure that your shield's protecting the guy on your right and your left, and you're expecting that back. And that's a little bit of a different variance when you get into the real world, as we call it as athletes. We You find that more me type of personality to be much more prevalent, not because folks are trying to do that out of malice or be just selfish. You almost have to be, in a way, in order to survive. And it's a very different approach than we're taught as athletes.
And so I'm a believer, BJ, in transferable skills. Going back to the pandemic, I mean, that was one of those things that like HR and corporate leaders finally embraced, because for many, many years, BJ, I know this is before you were you were in the world of business. If you were having a conversation with hiring managers and people in human resources, speaking broadly now, BJ, they would say they wouldn't believe in transferable skills. Great, you have skills, but like, did you have this same job somewhere else before you applied for this one? And the reason I bring this up is the transferable skills you brought as an elite quarterback to the corporate world. What were a couple of those? And I want to dig into some of it that you write about in the book, but what were some of those off the jump that you realized, oh, obviously I'm not having to evade a 350-pound defensive tackle, but what is something that's similar from the mindset of a quarterback that you were able to transfer and apply to an actual job?
Yep, I think the first is, without a shadow of a doubt, is consistency. Showing up day in, day out, same mindset, checking any kind of ego at the door. When for me, it was, I got into the business. My first experience out of the gate beyond the game was working alongside a bank, BB&T insurance company, working on their employee benefits branch for about 18 months. But once I transitioned from there and was able to widen my network from the skills I garnered there and moved into hospital administration, consistency became so key, because no matter what's going on in your home life and your personal life outside of those hospital doors, when you walk in there and you are the leader and they're looking for you for guidance and for knowledge and for that kind of calming voice, you have to be able to be consistent. They really, folks, and this is not just unique to healthcare, Joe. Folks that are in a professional setting, in a workplace environment, want that consistency, and supervisors that are going to be able to support them and they know what they're going to get, understanding that there are going to be times when that are tougher than others, but for the most part they should stay right here. It's like that quarterback. One of the first lessons we learn: never get too high with the highs, meaning you're never as good as they say you are, and never get too low with the lows, meaning just because you threw 3 interceptions this week doesn't mean you can't come back next week and be a gangbuster. So it's about staying consistent and being able to be that voice of reason and understanding that things can change on a dime, and you have that level head to be able to adjust as need be. Second, I would say, is discipline, the ability to stay the course and understand what it takes to be successful, what it takes to be a winner. Everybody wants to win, everybody wants to be successful, but what that actually takes is a lot of work, time, and discipline in the function to become great at what you do and a professional at your craft. And I think it takes discipline, and that's very transferable. I have noticed, whether that's from a workout regimen as a CEO. If you're going to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and you tell yourself you're going to work out and that's how you're going to start your day, all the way through to making sure that you show up to meetings, or show up to meetings on time, or making sure that while you're in the meeting, that it's a very disciplined, structured meeting. That's not just time being taken up with air. It's time that you're actually getting stuff done, and there's action coming out of those meetings. So, consistency, discipline, And then for me as a quarterback, I'd be remiss if I didn't say preparation. I think understanding the field and being able to have a game plan or being prepared going in to each day, each week, each month, I think is extremely important so that you have a kind of a barometer of where what it's supposed to look like, where you're supposed to be, and measuring that to see if you're getting better or worse, or know when you need to pivot, and having that flexibility component so that you can be successful. And as we say in the quarterback room, take what the defense gives you. You forcing things to happen oftentimes creates mistakes, and allowing yourself to be patient enough and have that discipline is critical when you're out in the corporate world, especially as the leader, as the CEO, when you're making decisions. That's critical.
Awesome. That's good. And I love how you follow the rule of threes with 3 examples. Love that, BJ. You're a professional. One of the things you write about in the book, The Pivot, is 2.5-second moments, which applies to your quarterback life, but you bring it forward into the professional life. And for viewers and fans of football, they know when they watch these games and they see the quarterback behind the line taking the ball and then they're about to throw, they don't realize that 2.5 seconds can feel like an eternity, but could also feel like a blink of an eye. So, for example, I'm about to start a stopwatch here, and this is going to be what 2.5 seconds is. Start. Bam. That's how much you have to decide to throw the ball. How do you bring that 2.5 second moment mindset into the professional life? Because for people listening and watching this, maybe like, what do you mean? I have 2.5 seconds to make a decision or something? You do. But tell me about that and how you bring it to life.
Yeah, I think the concept of making decisions in 2.5 seconds really ties very closely to what we just spoke about in terms of preparation. So the goal in the pocket of a quarterback when you're in that cup, as it's so perfectly formed with the offensive line in front of you, and
Rarely.
rarely, right, right, right. That's exactly right. It's all in theory, right?
Yes.
There, everything's going to work out perfectly. The 11 guys on the field are going to do exactly what they're supposed to do every single time. It never happens. So it's understanding, that you've got a clock in your head, that you understand the concept of play, still staying on that quarterback lingo and verbiage, that you understand what you're trying to do, the side of the field or area of the field you're trying to attack. And if that when that ball is snapped, if that is presented to you, you take it. If it is not, that is when you have to be able to react in that 2.5 seconds and understand the concept and what they're trying to do to you, the defense, and what you are trying to do to advance the ball, the offense down the field, so that you're able to make a good decision in a situation that maybe you weren't expecting that particular type of presentation. So it's understanding how to pivot. It's also understanding preparation. Same thing with discipline and consistency. I think the goal of a quarterback in 2.5 second, mindset, that mindset is to slow things down. When you're really good, you hear the really good ones talk about how the game really slows down. You've got the answers to the test. You know what the defense is trying to do to you from a corporate perspective. You understand what you're walking into that day or that week. You know what you're going to get. You know how to move the pieces around, and you're, like I said, you're playing chess, not checkers. You're knowing what this thing should look like, but you're not so rigid that and black and white to where you are like, oh, every situation is the same, because that's not it. That's not true either. You have to be able to be that flexible, more lucid type. But that 2.5 seconds is a great measuring stick, and where we try to get for best practice when it comes to playing that position and being successful at it, so that you can make fast, quick, easy decisions and react as need be.
So one of the things about being a quarterback is calling the plays, and usually you're relaying it from a coach. And it's always funny when my wife and I watch like a behind the scenes video
Yeah.
of like these, especially like you see like the John Gruden plays and some of these like longer West Coast offense plays that the quarterback's basically reading like an entire monologue. It seems like it goes on forever. And she's like, how do the players know what to do? And obviously, you talk about preparation and studying, but something you write about in the book is conscious, unconscious. And usually, this kind of sort of ties into what I was talking about. What I say to my wife, it's like for a lot of these guys, it's like in their blood, like it's in their DNA. Like the wide receiver just hears like X cross 36 go. They don't even have to think about it. Like it's in their it's in their subconscious. Break down that idea of conscious, unconscious.
Yeah. I think the most important thing with the conscious unconscious piece is you get to a place where it is so ingrained to you that you have worked on it and you've worked on it and you've worked on it, and you've practiced it and you've put it into motion and you've gone back to the film room and you've tweaked it a little bit and you've gone back to the field, you tried it again, and you realize you can't take, it can't take 7-step drop here. You got to take a 5-step drop, or maybe it's something that we need to drop down to a 3-step drop in order for us to play fast. That whole concept is about playing fast, playing with confidence, understanding what your mission is so that you can do that like it's second nature. That muscle memory takes over, and you have the ability to execute at a very high level day in and day out and be consistent with that. You don't just want to be that flash in the pan. You want to be able to take that into day in and day out, week in and week out, as we would say every Sunday in the NFL. And you want to be consistent when you're playing. That takes a lot of time and effort and work to get to that point. And a lot of folks, really strive to get to that point where they're out there and they're not thinking, they're doing. And that's a beautiful place to be. And that's when things really start to slow down, because now you're having fun. You're not worried about making the mistakes. You understand what the defense is doing, the offense is doing, and you're able to take it in stride, and really play at a very, very high level, because you're playing with speed, intensity, and it's very calculated. It's not a reckless movement. It's a very calculated movement.
Awesome. And you talk about fast in the book. You write about failing faster.
Mhm.
Tell me about that concept, because I think it was popularized obviously by the tech bros in the early 2000s about fail and fail often. But how does fail faster fit into your sort of way of life and the way you've developed personally and professionally over the last decade?
Yeah, fail, get up, fail faster. That's something that early on, when really this became a thing for me, Joe, post the playing days. When I got into that, my initial pivot of what am I going to do now? How do I hit that next button? That mentor that I tied into pretty quickly talked about this particular model, and it's funny you say that. He's a tech guy as well. And he talks about how many times he sees such talented folks fear making a mistake, and what that fear does is control them and never allows them to unlock that full potential that they may or may not have. You only know when you get there, but it really holds them back from really being able to spread their wings and fly. What failing allows you to do is figure out, real quickly, that's not right. Let's do it a different way. Let's clean that up. Let's go back out. Let's try it again. Oh, this isn't quite it. Let's go this way. And it gives you an opportunity to stretch it out and see real holes, Joe, versus perceived gaps. It shows you what to work on, because you know what is and what isn't, versus guessing. And that was one of the most influential concepts throughout the whole pivot for me, Joe, was not being afraid to make a mistake, but actually raising your hand, saying, give me that train wreck or that dumpster fire, that facility that's significantly a low performer. Not so much worry about failing and everybody going, oh, look at this place, it's doing horrible, who's the guy that's in there running that thing? But more so being able to learn two things. And I learned this early on in the game of football. It's just as important sometimes to learn what not to do as it is to what to do. And that's a very, very valuable lesson that I learned early, actually, in the collegiate days, when I was playing and having a lot of different turnover at the offensive coordinator position. And that's tough for a quarterback when you don't have that comfort level with the same guy year in and year out. That can be pretty difficult. But that failing, get up, fail faster concept almost gives you the permission to not so much worry anymore about, having that unblemished record. I know people look at Floyd Mayweather all the time, about how awesome of a career, and it is one of the best boxers pound for pound ever to put on the gloves. But the undefeated component in the we call real world is not necessarily as effective or valuable. What can be so valuable to organizations or folks that have been through real life adversity, that have faced challenges, that have been knocked down, that have to get up and reinvent themselves, or their careers, if you will. And that there's real value in that because it's franchisable. It's not something that just happened and you go, could you go do that again? I think it's something that really gives you an opportunity to see what they're made of and if they can do it long term and keep that sustained.
I love that. That's great. And you kind of hinted at what kind of like what your specialty is now. And you write about being this turnaround guy in healthcare administration. Um, there is something to be said about these folks like yourself that are turnaround CEOs. Like when a company is in the dumper, they'll be like, call that gal, call that guy, because they know how to fix it. And then that person comes in and they're really, really good at turning around, but they're almost like that episode from Seinfeld where George goes out on a high note. I'm good. I'm out. Uh, tell me about the idea and what kind of interests you to be being this turnaround guy, because there is almost like, and maybe you don't agree with this, but almost like a shelf life to the turnaround guy. Like once you turn around, your skill set is probably not best used sticking around. Like
Sure.
you're better off going to another place that you could again turn around.
Sure.
So tell me about the idea of you being this turnaround guy.
Yeah, it's funny, Joe. My mother was an educator for 33 years and had the privilege towards the end of her career for about 10 or 12 years or so to be a principal in the elementary schools in the inner city here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And she would do the same thing. She did 2 or 3 of schools that were in a position where they really needed some stabilization and to kind of be lifted back up and repositioned, and she would do that, and right when it would kind of be ready to yield its fruit and kind of get to that place where it's no longer a turnaround, it's really about maintaining and building off of the foundation that was just laid over the last year or so. They would move her, and then she would do it again, and then she would do it again. So, I would say that I kinda have seen that happen, from my, perspective, having a mother that does that. I kind of really picked up a lot of the different principles and concepts of how to, shake things off and hit the next button, and that there's gonna be noise when you're turning, organizations that are in a tough spot or a low performing spot, because oftentimes that's going to yield some change in the human capital side, which is tough anytime, you have to have turnover, and sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's tough because there's tenured folks that got to go, that might be staples in certain places. So those aren't always the fun parts of it, but that you've got to do it. But I like to kind of lay out kind of this example when you're looking at leadership as a whole. I had a guy tell me one time, look at it as if as a farmer. When you're going to farm or when you're about to plant crop, first thing you got to do is you've got to identify the space in which you're going to do that. That means you got to remove rocks, you got to remove brush, you got to remove all the different things in the soil, that so that you can have a nice rich plot, so that you can prepare the land in order for it to be sent to the next phase, which is tilling the land. So you've got leaders that can be really good at identifying the space and clearing the land. That's really where I'm kind of at with this particular concept and being that turnaround person. Then you've got the tilling of the land, where you're preparing the land for you to get ready to seed it. You're making sure that you've got all the appropriate, it's positioned right, the sunlight, etc. And you're getting ready to till the land and prepare for it to be seeded. Then you've got that farmer that likes to seed and water the land, and then finally you've got that final phase where that farmer is able to grow and harvest from that land. And it's very, very difficult, Joe, when you start in the turnaround phase, to go through all 4 phases at the same place, because of the things that you have to do in each phase in order to get it to the next phase. For example, if I'm in that turnaround phase and I've had to show folks that side where you've got to be a little tougher, a little bit more objective, a little bit firm, maybe a little tighter on the expenses, for them to love the culture in that phase would be foolish. But once you start moving it through and you get to finally get to that harvest, it is a fun place to work. It is a great, but it never happens without making sure that you start it right. So it's the same thing in leadership. You've got certain leaders that are really good at the turnaround, certain folks that are really good at the maintaining stage, and then you got certain folks that are really good at the culture building and able to kind of take it to that next level and grow upon what was already kind of laid before them. So it's a turnarounds for me have always been an area of comfort. It's what I did when I left the University of Tennessee and moved to Tennessee Chattanooga, where the year before they were 1-11, and we were able to turn that thing around to a 6-6 season. And then over the next 5 to 10 years, they were able to get 3 conference championships and really start to set that tone. And then in the hospital business, I've had the privilege of doing it 19 times now, and going into specifically in the behavioral health space, for freestanding psychiatric and substance use disorder facilities. Those are shops where you're dealing with a lot of staff and clientele, that are trying to find their way, and they're wanting to have a purpose. They want to get well. For the clients, they're at the lowest point in their life. For staff, they're folks that have either themselves, are in recovery and they're wanting to give back and learn what that looks like. But in every situation, Joe, that I have found, you're dealing with more me people than we people. And being able to build that culture and take that skill from the locker room now to the boardroom, it's been a really cool experience to be able to do that. It's tougher because again, in athletics, you naturally have folks wanting, what's the goal? Win a Super Bowl. What's the goal? Win a national. So everybody's pulling in that direction. In the real world, when you're getting out there, there is no quote unquote Super Bowl necessarily, because it's day in, day out grinding, and doing that work. And these folks they're organisms before we're an organization. These folks have families, Joe. These folks go home to taking care of, maybe they're the caretaker for their mother, or these folks have got real life problems beyond just work. So that was new for me, and understanding, how that was intertwined into the leadership skill set was pretty remarkable. But all fits into that turnaround mentality. And at the end of the day, you've got to set that entity up for success, and turning that around, stripping it down, cleaning it up from some of the old culture is a critical part of the business itself.
That's awesome. I was BJ. I was prepared for the football metaphors. I was not expecting a farming one. That was not on my bingo card for this conversation, but I appreciate it. If I can pick your brain before we wrap things up about one of the things that I've seen anecdotally from the patient side and from the physician side is the front of house culture. And I love, and since you're in healthcare administration, maybe this is something that you've seen a lot of, and that's patients. They spend most of their time with the front of house, whether it's the administrator in the front, the assistants, the schedule maker, all that, and then very little time with a physician, because we all know the physicians are very busy. And what comes of that is trying to find people that fit the culture of what the physician is doing in the back room. And like I said, I hear this from the actual patients of being like, I went into this doctor's office and I felt like I was ordering meat at the deli counter. And then I have a lot of physician clients, and they say the same thing to me. It's like, I don't know what's happening in the front of the house. I'm seeing patient after patient, and I don't know what the experience is like until the patient either fills out a service or makes a complaint. How do we connect those worlds? Because like most businesses, that front-facing staff will affect more the person than the actual execution of what's
100%.
going in, because it's, again, the execution is important, but like if they don't feel good about the way the whole process went down, maybe they just won't take away that much from that visit. Yeah, doctor says I need to like lay off the cheeseburgers, but like I felt like crap sitting in that office. So I don't care about eating. I'll just eat whatever I want. So tell me about that. How do we connect the front of house culture with the back of house culture?
Yeah, I love that question, Joe. And again, just to make sure I'm giving you my context,
Yes, please.
a lot of my 7 years in the space has been in the turnaround sector. So the culture component is usually comes after whoever comes in takes that place and then builds that upon. But I have had the privilege once. It was early in my tenure in the space, and it's one that I'm very very grateful for and proud of. But what I learned was the quarterback of the hospital is the physician, and nobody knows quarterbacks like I know quarterbacks. So understanding the needs of that quarterback and how the hospital needs to move and be able to understand and see through that lens. So what I was able to do was lean in hard to that physician, talk about what we need from him and what they need, what he needs from us, and find that common ground of, okay, well, listen, I need you out. I need you moving around. I need you seeing patients. But I also want you to understand anytime you come within 10 or 5 feet of someone, make sure you engage a staff member because you're the doctor and you're that rock star in this particular building. You are the rock star, and to be able to engage with a frontline staff member that is way more engaged with the patient from a time perspective, that means the world to that staff member, which ultimately is going to get passed along to the client, and that client is the beneficiary of what they would consider great care. So really trying to create that culture where you flip up the height. You see the triangle, right? You got the CEO and then you've got the mid level. We flip that triangle upside down. And the folks that are the closest to the actual patient, which are those entry level employees that are technicians, that are therapists, that are nurses, that are interacting with our patients day in and day out. The goal is to make sure that we support them first. And then you've got the CEO and your physician, but understanding we're the quarterbacks and it's how we interact with those staff members on the front line that are going to be the difference, all the difference in both the client experience, staff interaction, employee engagement, and then the overall culture of the house is really what I try to do. And if I have been at a place, or soon if I have my own place one day and do that, that's how I would approach it. You've got a quarterback that is a physician. They're very, very busy people, as you know, Joe. But I think that when you get the right one, and I've had one, it's pretty amazing to watch that dynamic between the CEO and the physician and how you allow that to infect that workplace in such a positive way. As the adverse, it can be the adverse effect as well if you're not careful, and that's when you get a lot of finger pointing, and bad, not bad care, but just the culture that nobody really wants to be a part of. Again, let's separate the two. Turnaround is when you're in that 8 to 10 months. That's not where you're establishing per se that culture. That's when you're really resetting you got a broken bone, you're resetting the bone, you're establishing the expectations. You're utilizing the high performers to be successful and no longer giving the squeaky wheels the grease. You're allowing those lower performers to move on and you're backfilling them with new blood, new talent, and then you focus on retaining that talent. It's only when you move on to that next phase is when you start to really see that culture take flight. So I don't want to mix the two because they're two very different things. You can't be in a turnaround and you're being tough, but you're smart. There's so many different ways that could be interpreted. The simple way to look at it, there's different phases in that, and in that turnaround phase, you're probably the most unpopular person, if you will, in the building, and oftentimes making tough decisions in the other phases, but specifically in turnaround, you're having to make the tougher decisions for the greater good of the group. So that's culture's critical, but that comes later once you've established the groundwork and set that foundation.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So, BJ, I always wrap up these conversations taking folks behind the dedication of the book. And you dedicated to my children, Trey, Brody, and Grace. Your unwavering love and curiosity inspire me every day. Why was it important to dedicate the books to your kids?
Yeah, I wanted something to leave behind one day, Joe, as they get older, just so that they understand that life and success both are not a straight line. Like it is very often folks think that it looks like this, but I can tell you from experience, it can be this, this. I mean, you could go down and you don't have the crystal ball, nor would you want to. I know that there's a lot of anxiety out there and stress in this world, and I understand that, but the beauty is in the journey and being able to pivot and stay flexible has been one of my greatest assets throughout the whole thing because being able to and again, not to use too many more of the sports analogies, but when you throw an interception, the reality of it is you're going to have to go back out there soon again, and you got to be able to lead your team, brush that off, not let that decision affect the next decision. And that's something that's really important to me that they learn. If there's anything I can pass along to them is that every knock is a boost and that it's important that you use those experiences in those tougher moments and you go into those with eyes wide open. You don't try to shut them and pray for them to end. Those scars and experiences are the fail, get up, fail faster. They are the unconscious conscious. They are the ones that are going to help lead you to really where your real purpose is. And you can't predict that. You have to be in it. You have to go through it. You have to get the scars and earn those stripes in order to come out the other side. So those three are really the driving force for sure. And I'm honored to be able to leave something small behind for them one day when they're in a tough situation. God forbid, hopefully I'm around, but if not, maybe it's a little roadmap for them to be able to kind of pivot out of it.
Awesome. It is The Pivot, the playbook for facing life's challenges and coming out a winner. His name is BJ Coleman. BJ, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate you, man.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about BJ and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.